As for the rest of the company, they really made no attempt in concealing the downright fright which possessed them. Dr. Pananer was a man to be pitied. Mr. Glidden, by some peculiar process, rendered himself invisible. Mr. Silk Buckingham, I fancy, will scarcely be so bold as to deny that he made his way upon all fours under the table. After the first shock of astonishment, however, we resolved, as a matter of course, upon further experiment forthwith. Our operations were now directed against the great toe of the right foot. We made an incision on the outside of the exterior, os sesamoidum pollicis pedis, and thus got at the root of the abductor muscle. Readjusting the battery, we now applied the fluid to the bisected nerves, when, with a movement of exceeding lifelikeness, the mummy drew up its first right knee. So as to bring it nearly in contact with the abdomen, and then, straightening the limb with inconceivable force, bestowed a kick upon Dr. Pananer, which had the effect of discharging that gentleman, like an arrow from a catapult, through the window in the street below. We rushed out en masse to bring in the mangled remains of the victim, but had the happiness to meet him upon the staircase, coming up in an unaccountable hurry, brimful of the most ardent philosophy, and more than ever impressed with the necessity of prosecuting our experiment with vigor and with zeal. It was by his advice, accordingly, that we made, upon the spot, a profound incision on the tip of the subject's nose, while the doctor himself, laying violent hands upon it, pulled it into vehement contact with the wire. Morally and physically, figuratively and literally, was the effect electric. In the first place, the corpse opened its eyes and winked very rapidly for several minutes, as does Mr. Barnes in the pantomime. In the second place, it sneezed. In the third, it sat up upon end. In the fourth, it shook its fist in Dr. Pananer's face. In the fifth, turning to Messrs. Glidden and Buckingham, it addressed them in very capital Egyptian thus: "I must say, gentlemen, that I am as much surprised as I am mortified at your behavior. Of Dr. Pananer, nothing better was to be expected. He is a poor fat little fool, who knows no better. I pity and forgive him. But you, Mr. Glidden, and you, Silk, who have travelled and resided in Egypt until one might imagine you to the manner born. You, I say, who have been so much among us that you speak Egyptian fully as well, I think, as you write your mother tongue. You, whom I have always been led to regard as the firm friend of the mummies, I really did anticipate your more gentlemanly conduct from you. What am I to think of your standing quietly by and seeing me thus unhandsomely used? What am I supposed by your permitting Tom, Dick, and Harry to strip me of my coffins and my clothes in this wretchedly cold climate? And in what light? Come to the point. Am I to regard your aiding and abetting that miserable villain Dr. Pananer in pulling me by the nose? It will be taken for granted, no doubt, that upon hearing the speech of other circumstances, we all either made for the door or fell into violent hysterics, or went off in general swoon. One of these three things was, I say, to be expected. Indeed, each and all of these lines of conduct might have been very plausibly pursued. And upon my word, I am at a loss to know how or why it was that we pursued neither the one nor the other. But perhaps the true reason is to be sought in the spirit of age, which proceeds by the rule of the contraries altogether, and it is now usually omitted as the solution of everything in the way of paradox and impossibility. Or perhaps, after all, it was only the mummy's exceedingly natural and matter-of-course air that divested his words of the terrible. However this may be, the facts are clear. No member of our party had betrayed any very particular trepidation, or seemed to consider that anything had gone very especially wrong. For my part, I was convinced that it was all right, and merely stepped aside out of the range of the Egyptian's fist. Dr. Pananer thrust his hands into the breeches pockets, looked hard at the mummy, and grew excessively red in the face. Mr. Glidden stroked his whiskers and drew up the collar of his shirt. Mr. Buckingham hung down his head, and put his right thumb in the left corner of his mouth. The Egyptian regarded him with a severe countenance for some minutes, and at length, with a sneer, said, "Why don't you speak, Mr. Buckingham? Did you hear what I asked you, or not? Do take your thumb out of your mouth." Mr. Buckingham hereupon gave a slight start, took his right thumb out of his left corner of his mouth, and by way of indemnification, inserted his left thumb in the right corner of the aperture above mentioned. Not being able to get an answer from Mr. B, the figure turned peevishly to Mr. Glidden, and in a peremptory tone, demanded in general terms what we all meant. Mr. Glidden replied at length in the phonetics, but for the deficiency of the American printing offices in hieroglyphical type, it would afford me much pleasure to record here in the original the whole of his very excellent speech. I may as well take this occasion to remark that all of the subsequent conversation in which the mummy took a part was carried on in primitive Egyptian, through the medium, so far as concerned myself and other untraveled members of the company, through the medium, I say, of Messrs. Glidden and Buckingham as interpreters. These gentlemen spoke with the mother tongue of the mummy with inimitable fluency and grace, but I could not help observing that, owing no doubt to the introduction of images entirely modern and, of course, entirely novel to the stranger, the two travellers were reduced, occasionally, to the employment of sensible forms for the purpose of conveying a particular meaning. Mr. Glidden, at one period, for example, could not make the Egyptian comprehend the term politics until he sketched upon the wall with a bit of charcoal a little carbuncle-nosed gentleman out of elbows, standing upon a stump with his left leg drawn back and his right arm thrown forward with his fist shut, the eyes rolled up toward heaven, and the mouth open at an angle of 90 degrees. Just in the same way Mr. Buckingham failed to convey the absolute modern idea, wig, until, at Dr. Pananer's suggestion, he grew very pale in the face and consented to take off his own. It will be readily understood that Mr. Glidden's discourse turned chiefly upon the vast benefits accruing to science from the unrolling and disemboweling of mummies, apologizing upon the score for any disturbance that might have occasioned him, in particular the individual mummy called Allan, and concluding with a mere hint, for it could scarcely be considered more, that as these little matters were now explained, it might be well to proceed with the investigation intended. Here Dr. Pananer made ready his instruments. In regard to the latter suggestion of the orator, It appears that Allan had certain scruples of conscience, the nature of which I did not distinctly learn, but he expressed himself satisfied with the apologies tendered, and getting down to the table shook hands with the company all around. When the ceremony was at an end, we immediately busied ourselves in repairing the damages which our subjects had sustained from the scalpel. We sewed up the wound in his temple, bandaged his foot, and applied a square inch of black plaster to the tip of the nose. It was now observed that the Count, this was the title, it seems, of Allan, had a slight fit of shivering, no doubt from the cold. The doctor immediately repaired to his wardrobe and soon returned with a black dress coat, made in Jennings' best manner, a pair of sky blue plaid pantaloons with straps, a pink gingham chemise, a flat vest of brocade, a white sack overcoat, a walking cane with a hook, a hat with no brim, patent leather boots, straw-colored kid gloves, an eyeglass, a pair of whiskers, and a waterfall cravat. Owing to the disparity of size between this Count and the doctor, but the proportion being 2 to 1, there was some little difficulty in adjusting these habiliments upon the person of the Egyptian, but when all was arranged, he might have been said to have been dressed. Mr. Glidden, therefore, gave him the arm, and led him to a comfortable chair by the fire, where the doctor rang the bell upon the spot and ordered a supply of cigars and wine. The conversation soon grew animated. Much curiosity was, of course, expressed in regard to the somewhat remarkable fact of Allan still remaining alive. "I should have thought," observed Mr. Buckingham, "that it is high time that you were dead." "Why," replied the Count, very much astonished, "I am little more than 700 years old. My father lived 1,000, but was by no means in his dotage when he died." Here ensued a brisk series of questions and computations, by means of which it became evident that the antiquity of the mummy had been grossly misjudged. It had been 5,050 years and some months since he had been consigned to the catacombs at Eleutherus. "But my remark," resumed Mr. Buckingham, "had no reference to your age at the period of interment. I am willing to grant, in fact, that you are still a young man, and my allusion was to the immensity of time during which, by your own showing, he must have been done up in asphaltum." "In what?" said the Count. "In asphaltum," persisted Mr. B. "Ah, yes. I have some faint notion of what you mean. It might be made to answer, no doubt, but in my time we employed scarcely anything else than the bichloride of mercury." "But what are we to... But we are especially at a loss to understand," said Dr. Ponhoner, "is how it happens that, having been dead and buried in Egypt 5,000 years ago, you are here today all alive and looking so delightfully well." "Had I been, as you say, dead," replied the Count, "it is more than probable that dead I should still be, for I perceive you are yet in the infancy of galvanism, and cannot accomplish with it what was a common thing among us in the old days. But the fact is, I fell into catalepsy, and it was considered by my best friends that I was either dead or should be. They accordingly embalmed me at once. I presume you are all aware of the chief principle of the embalming process?" "Why, not altogether." "Ah, I perceive. A deplorable condition of ignorance. Well, I cannot enter into details just now, But it is necessary to explain that to embalm properly speaking in Egypt was to arrest indefinitely all the animal functions subjected to this process.